I first heard it, Jamaican music, so-called, back in the winter of 1962, 63, when I started going to clubs as a 17-year-old, in the West End of London. Went to a few blues dances when I found out about them, and I heard music by Derek Morgan, Prince Buster, Rico Rodriguez, Folks Brothers, Carolina, big tune back then in the clubs, Stranger Cole, Rough and Tough. Um, as just someone who went to a club with my girlfriend at the time, and you know, had some great times, staying out all night, uh, smoking a bit of weed, etc. Just enjoying myself as a 17-year-old, as you're supposed to do, growing up in a Western advanced economy like the UK used to be. The 60s, it was a cool place, London was jumping those days, So, I wasn't hunting down records then. That came later. I mean, what I was really into was jazz. I was a huge jazz fan, still am, still love jazz, still love reggae, still love soul, love good country music, good rock music, whatever, any kind of music that's good, that I class as good, that gets to me. Yeah, I enjoy it still. And as my mum used to say, oh, he loves his music, but I will say it's kept him out of trouble, getting into music. I could be sticking up a garage somewhere if I hadn't have discovered sounds, something like that, breaking, I don't know, rolling people in the street with drunks and all of that, like that was the working class life, You had not very high paying jobs, but I was living at home then with my parents. So I paid, something to my mother for, board and lodging once I was working. And the rest I was free to spend on like clothes and music and going out. By the early 70s, I kind of started to hear about this music called reggae. I'd not been in the country until 1969. I was working overseas in Spain as a tour guide. So I wasn't really au fait with the trends, in fact, I was buying jazz records in Barcelona on my days off. And I did buy a Prince Buster EP in Barcelona with 30 pieces of silver. I sold it a few years back to a guy in Spain for mad money, But that was on Spanish stateside label, but it was obviously Buster production. The Trojan label, they put a 3 LP set out called The Trojan Story. And that kind of hipped me to the fact that, hey, there's a lot more to reggae than Prince Buster and, Desmond Decker, Israelites. At this point, Bob Marley wasn't a feature. That came 73 with when Ireland signed him. Before that, I had Toots and the Maytals, the Funky Kingston LP. I had a handful of singles that I'd bought in the early 60s, a couple of Scatterlights things, Bubba Brooks, Watermelon Man. Watermelon Man was another one of those big tunes in clubs in the early 60s, the Mongo Santa Maria version. But the ska version also caught my ear at the time, And I liked the instrumentals, particularly Scatterlights, because they were like jazz, improvised solos, tunes that I knew, I had that Mongo Santa Maria LP where about 11 of the 12 tunes on there were covered by the Scatterlights with changed names. At that time, Jamaica didn't have a copyright law that was modern. The copyright law that they had in Jamaica at that time was based on the 1911 English copyright law, which only related or pertained to notated music, written down music. So recordings weren't a feature of that old copyright law. It wasn't until 1993 that Jamaica enacted a modern copyright law, that covered the rights of artists and producers, even if they never actually, some artists never got their full rights. But that's like another thing that's common to the music business worldwide. A producer, so-called, some of them will do anything to avoid paying what they have to pay once they've sold the record. They've spent the money. 1974, I met this guy called Penny Real. He was a writer and journalist, and we were friends. So we started hunting down all the junk shops and other places where we could find old Jamaican or UK pressings of Jamaican records. And in a couple of years, just doing that, I accumulated a large collection. Those times you could buy records for peanuts. Nobody was really, only there was a handful of collectors from the skinhead days mostly. People like Chris Lane, John McGillivray, Noel Hawkes, Tony Rounce. Those people in London were collectors of Jamaican music. Bob Brooks was another one. Bob Brooks started collecting reggae from the age of 12, in like 69, 70. I got to know all those people when I was a partner in a reggae shop in London that I co-founded called Daddy Cool Records. That lasted about a year, and then my so-called partner decided to dissolve the partnership. And at that time, I was naive as far as business went. He had the controlling share. He had the 51, I had the 49%, But at the same time, he wasn't really my type of person, if you get my drift. He was a money guy. He loved money, whereas I love music. So then I went and worked in the post office, and then 78, the people who started Honest John's Records in London, they were expanding their business, and they opened up a basement to their shop in Camden Town, and I went in there as a labourer. What happened was I was working nights in the post office, and I'd get up about midday and then go into Honest John's, do half a day there, then go back down to the post office and do the night shift. At the end of the period I did that work labouring, they said, "How much money do you want?" I said, "Well, just pay me in records." So then they offered me a job because, being a record collector from way back, mostly jazz, rock, bit of reggae and so on, I could price any record that came under the counter, knew what we could sell it for. And that was my skill set at the time. So they offered me a job as mostly as the jazz buyer. But they also opened a reggae shop called Maroon's Tunes in the West End of London. And that was staffed by two guys, Leroy and Ray. They were both reggae fans. Leroy was actually Rita Marley's brother. Leroy was Jamaican, but Ray came from another island, I forget now, small island. And when they had a day off, I would cover for either one of them on their day off, as well as doing the jazz pricing and the, with all the reviewers bringing in stuff at the Camden Town shop. They opened other shops and they put me in a shop in Monmouth Street in the West End of London. This is like late 70s. And that was right opposite Ray's jazz shop, literally opposite. And so like, I'd go in the morning, go and get a coffee, and then go into Ray's and go through the racks, see if I could find anything of interest. In 1979, the two-tone thing happened when I was working at Honest John's in Camden Town. I compiled a record called Intensified, which was like a ska compilation. And to my amazement, that sold 60,000 copies the first year in the UK, let alone anywhere else. So the first compilation I did was a roaring success. The second one also sold well, and I did a rock steady one called Catch This Beat, all for Island Records, and another one I co-compiled called The Blue Beat Years. Then I went back to college and did the degree, because I thought, music business, there was no prospect of a permanent job. It was all freelance. So I thought I need to get some educational qualifications so I can get a steady, decent job, trying to scrape my way up into the middle class, At the end of the 3 years, I was looking around for something to do, and a guy phoned me up from Trojan and asked me about composer credits on certain records. He was the A&R guy at Trojan, a guy called Patrick Meads. And eventually, what happened, Patrick left Trojan and I got the job as the compiler for Trojan. The owner, Colin Newman at the time, through a lot of different ownerships, Trojan. Colin Newman was actually the fourth owner. I left Trojan in 1990, having done around 50 albums for them in 2 years, compilations. That kind of got me a name, as a, quote, expert. Although I never really classed myself as that. People call you different things, but, I know who I am, if you know what I mean. Bunny Lee used to call me the professor, which I always found really funny. But anyway, working at Trojan at that time, I hooked up with Bunny Lee, who I'd met briefly in the mid-70s with Penny Real, when we both worked for the Black Echoes newspaper, which was a weekly black music paper. I did the reggae singles reviews, and Penny, or Peter as his real name, Peter did the interviews and features and whatnot on Jamaican music, reggae particularly, because that was the period of roots and dub and DJ stuff, Big Youth, Yabba You, Pablo, all of those times, really great records. And obviously at the same time, Bob Marley was busting out to the crossover audience via Chris Blackwell's Island Records. But after I finished with Trojan, I went to Ireland to see if I could get something going. I never got, they didn't offer me a job, although I asked for one. They knew I could compile, because obviously my compilations had revived Trojan Records. When I first started with them, I was told that their annual turnover was just over £150,000 a year when I left. 2 years later, their turnover was £1.25 million a year. Of course, I didn't really get to earn out of that. But so it goes, you know. So you learn, you know, through basically getting exploited. That's the only way to learn under this system. You get exploited, and you learn not to get exploited. Hopefully.